It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons where the world seemed to move in slow motion. I was lounging on my sofa, aimlessly scrolling through my phone, when an unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was Clara, Liam's mom. My best friend Liam had left for his freshman year at university a couple of months back, and the silence from their end of town had been noticeable. Her voice was hesitant at first. She said she was cleaning out Liam's room, getting it ready for when he came back for the holidays, and she'd found an old university sweatshirt of mine he borrowed ages ago. It wasn't a big deal, but she insisted I should have it back. I told her it was fine, but she was gently persistent, so I agreed to swing by. Their house was in Evanston, a familiar drive I'd made 1,000 times. Nothing about the journey was out of the ordinary. I knew Clara would be there, but in all the years I'd known her, she was always just a background figure, a pleasant maternal presence who offered snacks or reminded us not to be too loud. I'd always thought she was remarkably beautiful for her age, probably in her mid-40s, but carrying an elegance that made her seem timeless. Beyond that, she was simply Liam's mother. That was the beginning and end of it. So when I pulled up to the familiar brick house, I expected the usual brief polite exchange. But when she opened the door, the first thing that struck me was the quiet. The house, usually buzzing with Liam's music or the sound of a video game, was utterly still. Clara stood there offering a small, tired smile. She wasn't dressed up. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked a little surprised to see me, as if she'd forgotten she'd even called. My eyes darted around the empty hallway behind her, the silence feeling thick enough to touch. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Thanks for coming all this way for a silly sweatshirt." I managed a clumsy response, holding up my hands as if to show it was no trouble. Of course, I was just in the area. I didn't realize. "It's so quiet in here now." She let out a faint sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire house. "Oh, you have no idea," she said, a flicker of something raw in her eyes. "It's just empty. Do you want to come in for a minute? I just made some coffee." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. It felt strange to be invited in without Liam there as the buffer, but I found myself nodding and stepping inside. The house was the same, but it felt entirely different. I'd always seen her as this composed, unshakable maternal figure. I had never once considered the possibility of feeling this strange magnetic pull toward her. We settled in the living room and she handed me a mug of coffee. At first, our conversation was light, centered on Liam and how he was adjusting to college life. But as we talked, I noticed her opening up in a way that was completely new. She spoke about the rhythm of her days, how the silence in the mornings was the hardest part, and how even when she was surrounded by colleagues at work or friends, a profound sense of loneliness seemed to follow her home. For a little while, I forgot I was talking to my best friend's mother. It was just the two of us, sharing a moment of unguarded honesty. The way she looked at me when I spoke with an intensity that suggested she was truly hearing me made something shift inside me. I started to see her in a different light. There was a whole person there separate from her role as Liam's mom. She offered a faint, almost melancholic smile. "Ethan, you've grown into such a kind young man," she said. "It's hard to wrap my head around it. I still picture you and Liam as little boys chasing each other through this very living room." I didn't know how to reply, so I just gave a small appreciative nod. A new kind of energy was crackling between us. Something unspoken but undeniably there. I could feel it. A subtle current, a quiet tension, but I had no idea what it meant. All I knew was that I didn't feel ready to leave. She stood up and moved toward the kitchen, and I found myself following her. As she walked past, I caught the faint, clean scent of her perfume. For a brief instant, the label of Liam's mom completely dissolved. She was just a woman, an individual with her own history and her own unfulfilled needs. "Thank you for stopping by," she said, turning to face me by the counter. "I think I really needed to talk to someone today." I gave her a small smile, a warmth spreading through my chest. "Any time," I said, and I meant it more than I realized. As I walked away from the house that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed between us. An unspoken seed had been planted, and I had no idea where it might grow. The next time I saw Clara, it was entirely by chance. I was at the local market picking up a few things for dinner when I spotted her in the pasta aisle. She was holding 2 different jars of marinara sauce, studying the labels with a delicate frown creasing her brow. For some reason, that small, ordinary action struck me profoundly. How had I never noticed how effortlessly graceful she was? It wasn't just her physical appearance. It was the way she moved, the quiet confidence in her posture. She seemed to possess a knowledge of the world that the rest of us were still trying to figure out. I hadn't expected to run into her, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to act. We hadn't spoken since that strangely intimate afternoon at her house. But something about that day had stayed with me. Something about her smile and the vulnerable way she looked at me lingered in my mind. I had tried to dismiss it as a one-time unusual encounter. But then she looked up and her eyes met mine. "Ethan," she said, her voice a low murmur, but her smile was immediate and welcoming. It was the kind of voice that had a way of putting you instantly at ease. I smiled back, trying to keep my own voice steady and casual. "Hey, Clara. Didn't expect to see you here." She gestured with one of the jars toward her nearly full shopping cart. "Just grabbing a few things for the week," she replied. "What about you?" It was such a simple question, but it blossomed into a full conversation right there between the canned tomatoes and dried pasta. We talked about food, the unseasonably warm weather, and other trivial things. But underneath the surface of our light chatter, there was a thrum of something deeper. A subtle but distinct tension hummed in the air between us. It was in the little glances, the quiet smiles, and then almost out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you busy tonight?" She said it so casually as if the answer didn't matter, but I could sense she was testing the waters. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged, affecting an air of nonchalance. "Not really, just planning a quiet night at home." A faint smile touched her lips. "Liam's been calling a lot, but he's always out with his new friends on Friday nights. I was thinking of actually cooking a proper meal for once. You should come over. It would be nice to have some company." The invitation caught me completely by surprise. My first instinct was to politely decline. After all, besides our shared connection to Liam, what did we really have to talk about? But the earnestness in her voice made it difficult to say no. Before I could overthink it, I heard myself agreeing. "Yeah, sure. I'd like that." And that was it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Later that evening, as I drove back to her house, my stomach was in knots. There was a nervous energy buzzing in my chest that I couldn't quite place, as if I was about to step into a territory I wasn't prepared for. When I arrived, the house felt as warm and inviting as ever. The scent of garlic and herbs wafted from the kitchen, filling the space with a home-cooked aroma that felt almost too comforting. Clara was already there, humming softly to herself as she stirred a pot on the stove. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her, and that's when it hit me. The woman standing before me didn't feel like the Clara I had known for years. She looked the same, but something about her was more authentic, more open. "Go ahead and have a seat," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." I sat down at the small kitchen table, trying to appear relaxed. She moved around the kitchen with an effortless grace, as if she belonged there in every sense of the word. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to make sense of the storm of feelings brewing inside me. It wasn't just about her appearance or how at ease she seemed. It was about how she made me feel seen, as if I were more than just her son's friend. We ate, and the conversation flowed with surprising ease. There were no awkward pauses or forced pleasantries. We talked about life and how things rarely go according to plan. She spoke about her younger days before she was a mother and how she missed the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being excited about the unknown. She confessed that with Liam gone, her life had fallen into a predictable, monotonous pattern. There was a raw edge to her voice when she said it. It felt like she was finally letting out years of pent-up feelings, years of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I just listened. I didn't offer any profound advice or deep insights. I just nodded and gave her the space to speak. And as I sat there in silence, I started to notice the little things. The way her eyes would light up when she was passionate about a topic. The genuine, uninhibited sound of her laughter. She was no longer just Liam's mom. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, and her own life. "Thank you," I said as we finished eating, and I started to help clear the table. She smiled at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something deeper in her gaze. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "It's been a long time since I've had a real conversation with anyone." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave her a slight nod, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. There was a current between us now, something we didn't have to name out loud. When it was time for me to leave, she gave me a hug at the door. It was simple, brief, and warm, but her hand lingered on my back for a second too long, and that single moment stayed with me. "Take care, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My mind was reeling as I walked back to my car. The evening had seemed so ordinary on the surface, yet it had unlocked something inside me. I couldn't define it. She hadn't done anything overtly suggestive, but the way she looked at me, the way she listened, it made me feel like there was something real between us, a connection of a different kind. I had been to Liam's house hundreds of times, but this visit was different, and I hated how much I found myself thinking about it in the days that followed. I tried to push it out of my mind to pretend nothing had happened. A few days later, Liam called asking about things back home. I figured talking to him would help clear my head. But as soon as I heard his voice, a pang of guilt hit me. We talked about his classes, his new friends, and the silly things he was up to. Even with the familiar banter, my mind kept drifting back to her, back to Clara. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to leave me alone. Her smile, the way she carried herself. She felt different to me. Now that weekend, I got a call from Liam. He was worried about his mom. "Hey man, have you talked to my mom lately?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "She sounds off. Every time I call, she says she's fine, but I can hear it in her voice. She sounds lonely." The question caught me off guard. "I saw her at the market the other day," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She seemed okay to me." It was a partial truth, and it felt heavy on my tongue. "I don't know," he sighed. "With me gone, the house is so empty. I think she's just having a hard time adjusting. Could you maybe check in on her? Just see if she needs anything." "Yeah, of course," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. A part of me knew this was a bad idea, but a larger part felt compelled to agree. I felt caught, a strange sense of responsibility settling over me. So that Saturday, I found myself driving back to Evanston. I told myself I was just doing my friend a favor. I was going to stop by, have a quick friendly chat, and report back to Liam that everything was fine. When I knocked, Clara opened the door with a look of mild surprise that quickly melted into a warm smile. "Ethan, what a nice surprise." "Hey," I said, trying for a casual tone. "Liam called. He was a little worried about you, so I told him I'd stop by and say hi." Her smile faltered for a second, and I saw a flash of that same vulnerability from our first conversation. "Oh, he worries too much," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm fine. Just, the house was as quiet as before." She led me into the living room, the same room where we'd had coffee. She sat on the couch, maintaining a slight distance, her posture a little rigid. I could tell she was putting on a performance for my benefit, for Liam is by extension. "So, you're doing okay?" I asked, sitting on the armchair opposite her. She paused, then gave a slow nod. "Honestly, no," she admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's been a long week. The silence is just deafening sometimes." Her honesty was disarming. It felt as if she had peeled back another layer, revealing someone who wasn't just Liam's mom, but a person struggling with a profound sense of loss and solitude. "I get that." I found myself saying it's not always easy. We sat in silence for a few moments. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a comfortable, shared quiet. I wanted to say something more, something to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. I just looked at her, wondering at the depth of what she was feeling. After a while, I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. The weight of the situation was pressing down on me. As I stood at the sink, I heard her footsteps behind me. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice both gentle and direct. "Can we talk for a second?" I felt my pulse quicken. Yeah, sure. What's up?" She walked into the kitchen, closing the door softly behind her. The space between us shrank, and my chest tightened as she came closer. I wanted to thank you," she said, her gaze not quite meeting mine. "For coming by, for listening the other night, it meant a lot to me." The sincerity in her voice hit me harder than I expected. "Of course," I replied, my own voice softer now. "You know you can talk to me anytime." She nodded slowly, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then, as if trying to shift the focus, she said, "Liam's a good kid. You know, he's had his own struggles, but he has such a good heart." I nodded again, unsure of where this was going, but her gaze lingered on me, holding it for a second longer than necessary. That same spark I had felt before was back, humming between us like a taut wire. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "He really does." She smiled, but there was something else in that smile, something I couldn't quite decipher. I wondered if she was thinking the same thing I was, and for a split second I considered asking her. I almost asked what was happening between us, but I held back. I just stood there caught in the charged silence with her, wondering what the next move was. Finally, she broke the spell with a quiet, "Thank you again, Ethan." "Any time," I responded. But I knew, and I think she knew, that the word had taken on a new meaning. A week went by after that intense conversation in the kitchen. It wasn't a loud or dramatic encounter, but it lingered in my thoughts, replaying itself over and over. Every time I thought about Clara now, the air felt different, charged with an unspoken electricity. I couldn't tell if she felt it with the same intensity or if I was just projecting my own complicated feelings onto our interactions. Either way, the dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. I tried to keep things normal with Liam, calling him and texting like we always did. He would talk about his classes and parties, and I would do my best to keep the mood light, but it was a struggle. Every time his name came up, my mind would inevitably drift to his mother, and a wave of guilt would wash over me. I found myself noticing the smallest details about her. The way her head tilted when she listened intently. The way her eyes would meet mine for a fraction of a second too long across a room. They were tiny, almost imperceptible things, but I saw them. I felt them. Then came another Saturday. Liam was busy with midterms and had warned us he'd be off the grid studying. I had the day to myself and I was